Hi everyone, I'm Tony, CEO and co-founder of Uizard, and today I'm going to show you how AI is helping democratizing design. Those numbers are probably not going to surprise any of you. There's quite a few websites uploaded daily on the internet. In 2018, there was an estimated 14,000 every day, and about 1,000 new apps on both the App Store and the Google Play. And who is building those websites and apps? Of course, designers and developers. And there's been quite a shift within the industry. The ratio between designers and engineers has changed quite a bit. These numbers were compiled by Figma in 2017, and they found that, for example, IBM used to have one designer for 72 engineers back in 2012, and now they have one designer for 8 engineers in 2017. So quite a massive shift. Companies finally understood that the way to build good products was not just to build good features, but also to have a compelling design and a compelling user experience. Design is hard though. It's a really hard search problem. It requires a lot of iteration, and it's quite a painful process that takes time. And searching is hard, and so methods and philosophies were developed in order to help the process. For example, design thinking, or design sprint that some companies are practicing on a monthly basis. And of course, those come in different flavors and are practiced by different companies around the world. One of the core features of this method is that they advocate for a process where not just designers are taking part of the design process, but also product managers, user researchers, domain experts and chief of product, and sometimes even developers. As we all know, UX design is how things work, and UI design is how things look. And there is a lot of different tasks involving both of those processes. And of course, when we don't want to build a product, we also at some point are going to involve development. So within this spectrum of digital product design, where is democratization happening? First, let's look at UI design. And let's start with a quote I like quite a lot. If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything becomes a nail. And for a very long time in UI design, we had 2 hammers. And in order to analyze a bit how things evolved, we're going to look at something called the hype cycle. So the hype cycle describes the life cycle of a product from the research and development phase towards the commercialization and widespread availability of the technology. So to give you an example, delivery drones are still at the R&D stage. They are starting to ramp up and increase the expectation that people have. Level 5 self-driving cars on top of the inflation peak. Blockchain is already through the disappointment valley. Virtual reality is slowly going into the real world. And for example, technology like speech recognition is already considered commercially viable and is starting to spread. So what does the hype cycle look for design? And as I've said before, in the 90s, we've seen 2 products becoming the hammer of design, Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator. So they are the first generation products. They really increased the peak of expectations as far as tooling for UI design, because UI design became more and more its own kind of like category within the product teams. The thing is, though, if any of you have been using Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator for UI design, it kind of feels like taking a supersonic jet to go to the bakery 2 blocks down the street. It works. You can get from A to B, but it's definitely overkill. There are so many options and features that you will never use for UI design. You need to be an expert to use it. And quite frankly, you would go to the bakery much faster if you were to take your bike. You don't want to be that person when it comes to UI design. And luckily for all of us, a product called Sketch was launched in 2010 and allowed us to go beyond this disappointment valley into a slope of productivity. And third generation products came along in 2016 and 2019, Adobe XD and Figma, which I consider to be third generation products, building on the strength of Sketch. And the reason why they are part of this last third generation phase in this graph is because we can say yes, answer yes to this question. Can the audience achieve its goal efficiently using the product? And in this case, we're talking about UI design. So the audience is UI designer. And the answer is yes. UI designer can efficiently achieve their goal when it comes to UI design by using those products. How about UX design then? As we've seen, design thinking is hard, design sprints and design workflows are complicated, and people seem to agree that in order to successfully run them, you bring on board a lot of different people. Chief of product, UX designers, product managers, user researchers, domain experts. But can those people use UX design tools? Well, if we look at those first generation tools, Sketch and InVision, I would say that they were contributing to the peak of inflated expectation of UX design. Everybody was starting to talk about UX design back then, and the product were getting really hyped. Right now, we are going through this disappointment, as in those tools are great, but they can't really solve a UX design problematic efficiently. And the reason for that is because if I answer this question, can the audience achieve its goal efficiently using the product? I have to answer no, because the audience is not just UI designers and UX designers. A successful design process involves other players, other people that currently would have a hard time using those products. And so using Photoshop and Illustrator for UI design might feel like taking a supersonic jet to go down the block buy some bread, and I would argue that using those other tools for UX design is basically the same. Sketch, InVision, Figma, Adobe XD, Framer, they are all great tools, but they are overkill when it comes to do UX design, and they are very complicated to use for non-designers. So how can we actually democratize those tools to make them available to the entire product team and not just professional designers? Let's first look at the democratization of photography, which I think is a great example of how you can get from an expert only product to something that can be used for by a lot of people. In 1888, the Kodak launched their first commercial camera. Then in 1975, they actually got the first working prototype of the digital camera. And in 27, we've seen the first iPhone, to the point where already 10 years ago, Instagram launched in 2010. 10 years forward, today, more than 100 million videos and photos are uploaded to Instagram. And that's really proved the point. Photography is now democratized. We went from an expert product to a mainstream product. Something that used to be really hard to use, that required a high learning curve, to something that really anybody can use really quickly. An expert photograph will think about picking the right lens, setting the shutter speed, and so on and so forth. Well, I just want to take a picture, and that's all I care when it comes to photography. I'm not an expert. So we moved from a point where the person had to do the hard work to a point where the technology does the hard work for you. Interestingly enough, when Kodak actually commercialized their first camera, they already had this vision of democratizing photography. This is the ad that they used back then. You press the button, we do the rest. Obviously, as we all know, the reality didn't actually meet the expectation, but this is what the goal they set themselves. What does it mean for UX design? And I think we need to think things very differently. The same way when Henry Ford was asked, why did you build a car? He said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And so perhaps if we want to truly build the next generation of UX design tool, we have to think differently. And once again, design thinking and design processes is hard and involve a lot of different people. But as we've seen, it's really weird that technically only 2 of those people can use the product. Those products are made and designed for designers. What about the other people that we know are valuable to the design process. We need to go from products that are hard to use and where the person has to do the hard work, has to involve time to learn to use those products, to technologies that are easy to use and does the hard work for you, the user. And so let's take a step back, right? We have digital product design that involves UX design, UI design, development, and the product lifecycle has multiple pieces, as we all know. We tend to believe that, I'm going to have user needs, I'm going to, wireframe, brainstorm, create some UX design, I'm going to create prototypes, test it, UI design it, and develop it, and then I'm done. I can deliver my project, and this is over. As we all know, the reality of the product lifecycle is a lot more messy. There are a lot of iteration. You would go through weeks of work and then realize, oh, that was wrong because we didn't test this earlier. You need to go back and forth and so on and so forth. So how can we actually create a tool that fits nicely in this messy workflow? Well, first of all, let's look at what are the methods used by people at each step of this workflow. First of all, what are people using when it comes to ideation and brainstorming? Surprisingly, in 2020, the tool that people prefer for brainstorming and ideation is actually pen and paper. People would prefer to just sketch on a whiteboard or on the notebook instead of using a software. So hand drawing really is king, even today in 2020. How about UI design tools? Well, not surprisingly, the tool that were second generation and third generation product in the UI design hype cycle that we've seen before actually is the most popular design tool still today, Sketch, Figma, and Adobe XD. Now, if you are to build a web app today in 2020, you are likely going to use either React or Angular or Vue, very likely. So we've seen that just by looking at those few different tools, there is quite a lot of different products, technology that will be used along the life cycle. And there is a fundamental problem with this. Every step of the way, you reach a dead end. You can't use the artifacts that your colleagues created in the new step of the workflow. You have to somehow redo work every single time. You're done with your sketches, your designers have created a lot of wireframes, but somehow you need to recreate them in the software if you want to make use of them. The designer have completed some artifacts and want to test something with real data. The developer have to come in and rewrite everything from scratch. So this is not really flexible and iterative. There is fundamental roadblock along the way. And so again, because of all these roadblocks and because of the difficulty of learning how to use the current available tool, people right now need to adapt to technology. And the question we've asked ourselves was, can technology adapt to people instead? And this is, for me, a really good example of a technology that actually adapts to people. This is a video camera from a Tesla, and you can actually see the feed in the AI and algorithm boxes and annotation that is generated in real time, well, near real time. And at the core of this technology that is able to make sense of the messy real world that we live in is something called deep learning. And so artificial intelligence is really just a name of a research field. And within it, there is a set of tools called machine learning. And within machine learning is where deep learning really is categorizing. And deep learning is really what has enabled current application of computer vision, such as the self-driving car video we just saw, or speech synthesis, or natural language processing. So every time right now people refer to AI, they typically mean deep learning most of the time. And deep learning has really been a transforming technology for the past 5 years. And so in 2017, with my team and I, we asked a simple question. Can we actually leverage deep learning in order to build a better UX tooling experience for the current challenges of the workflow? And this tool, we call it Uizard, with a U. And so we started our research in 2017. The same year, Airbnb showed interest in the same kind of problematic. And then in 2018, Microsoft actually showed interest in the same domain. We had our own breakthrough in 2018 and 2019 as well. And now we're in 2020 with a private beta used by over 10,000 users. So what did we learn from building Uizard? What did we learn from using AI and deep learning in order to somehow provide and develop a third generation UX tool? We've learned that for a successful third generation UX tool to be, there need to be 4 properties: abstraction, adaptation, exploration, and continuation. Abstraction refers to the fact that when you are doing UX design, you should be manipulating components and concepts instead of pixel and vectors. And it makes sense, right? You don't want to think about moving something 5 pixels to the left when you do UX design. You have a problem, you quickly want to test it and validate that whether your solution is correct or provide any value. Which is, by the way, one of the reasons why design systems have become so important within product development. You want to be able to think in terms of component and concept and not just pixel and vectors. And this is, again, like one of the core pieces, building blocks of the technology we've developed at Uizard. Second, adaptation. The technology should adapt to your way of working and not the other way around. If we know that people want and prefer to sketch and brainstorm on paper, on the whiteboard, on a tablet, or even given a software, then they should be able to use whatever they want. The technology should be able to take those sketches and transform them into something that they can use for the rest of the workflow. And again, this is what we've built at the core of the technology. You can upload your sketches regardless of where you made them, and then we can transform them into something you can use for your UX design processes and your prototype. Funny enough, one of our beta member actually went as far as drawing his sketches on the sand by the beach. So it's interesting to think that maybe the future of design actually look a lot better than it is today. But time will tell. Third point, exploration. So in order to build a successful third generation UX tool, we think exploration is extremely important. You should be able to explore new ideas, explore new inspiration really quickly without having to redo any work at all. And once again, this is something we've built at the core of the technology. You don't want to have a new idea the next day that you think is fundamentally better than the one you had yesterday and require your team to just redo work. You want to quickly test that as cheaply as possible. 4, and last point, continuation. Why do you need to start from scratch at every step of the way? You should be able to reuse things all the way through. So if you build a prototype and you want to quickly see how it would feel with real business data, why do you need to wait a few days for a developer to actually re-implement that same prototype in code? You should be able to just hit one button, download the artifacts, and then hook up your business data and test it. Continuation is really key to make sure that every step of the way is not a dead end anymore, but is flexible and iterative. So at the core, what we've learned throughout this 2.5 years of research and development is that AI really can become the interface. And let's see in a minute what that means in practice. AI, the interface, means that the technology really does the hard work. The complexity is hidden away from the core user, and it creates this very low learning curve, easy to use experience, and it becomes the glue between your team members. So they interact with the core product, and the AI underlying it become the glue between the team members and make sure that everything works smoothly. So if we go back to the hype cycle of UX design, as we've seen, because the success of the design process involves a lot more stakeholders than just designers, a third generation product should be easy to use for everybody in your team. I will let you decide whether Uizard is a valid third generation product, but at the core, it really is all about empowering everybody in your organization to build those products as quickly and as easily as your thoughts come. So the future of UX design, in my opinion, is really like making the clear and easy interface between our messy human real world and the digital realm in which we are creating those beautiful and amazing products. And AI really truly has the potential to be this enabling interface between those two worlds and make it seamless to, keep being messy, keep being a creative human being, and then provide this value straight into your work and straight into your digital product workflow. So really, if we are to democratize design, I think AI will be one of the core enablers. Thank you very much, and I will be more than happy to answer your questions.